Hello, this is Burr Stewart, and welcome to part 100 of my continuing series of model railroad videos. I hope you've enjoyed every single one of them, and I can't believe we got to 100. But what I wanted to do today is just take advantage of a clean room and a relaxed environment and go over and just show you the entire layout from start to finish. As you know, some of the videos on this channel are crazier than others. Usually there are a few people in the room making noise, talking, we have engines tooting, we have couplers crashing bang. And I thought for our 100th operations video it would be nice to relax in the quiet of the lonely room and just look at the layout itself. And this way, if you have any questions about things you want me to talk about in future videos or operations you haven't seen, let me know in the comments, and we'll work on them in the next 100 videos in my series of operations videos. So let's rewind the tape and start again. This layout fills a 24 by 33 foot basement with two aisles. On the left aisle goes around the left side, and on the right, straight ahead, there's a large room opening up. You can see Seattle's Interbay yard here on the right with the automobile racks and the future Subota Steel complex. And on the left you can see the main room, which we originally thought we would have a ping pong table in, but it's turned out to be, as you can see, very handy for crew hangout. And that big box in the middle is a Corsi box for filtering the air, which is quite handy during COVID. And as you see, we have a guest book for signing in. Underneath that brown bowl is some chocolate and the water for people to stay healthy and refreshed. And on the left here, you see Everett's Delta yard. As the track in front is the low line, which goes to Everett's Bayside yard, past the Squid Bridge, which you've seen a million times. Here's the dispatcher's desk, which we don't usually see, and Robin Peel made that nice computer graphic of the schematic of the layout for the dispatcher. On the right, you see the main Bayside yard, and on the left is the Seattle Stacy Street yard. On the top deck is the Burlington yard, north of Everett. We'll get to that in a minute. And then down the aisle in the back of the room, you have Seattle's Argo yard on the left and the Delta Y on the right with the Samish River Bridge. And the famous Rainbow Bridge, which we don't use during operating sessions, but it's good for turning trains around in between sessions. And as you know, we run trains quite a bit. This is how the bridge comes down, just by hand. And it's a little precarious the way it is now. If you were to have a derailment, it would probably drop things on the floor, but we haven't had derailments much. And we plan to put plexiglass edges on that, and I'm sure when we do, we'll have a video about it, which you can enjoy. It's kind of calm here with nobody running trains, but I did set up one train running just so that we'd have some action. You can see it there going along the low line in the distance. Here's the Delta Y on the bottom and the main line to Skykomish at the top. I'm trying to make this a fairly quick tour, even though I want it to be relaxed. But on the upper deck, we have the Skykomish River Bridge down at this end of the layout. And on the bottom, you have the Intermodal facility, as well as Lone Star Cement, which I've wanted to model for a long time. And finally, Tim Smith came along and scratch-built this replica. You can see from the photo, he's doing a really nice job. Down in here is the very south end of the layout. It's a hidden staging yard. And you can see in there, there's 7 tracks. Plus a couple of more tracks that we use for Renton and the Darrington branch. and those are underneath the peninsula to the right. It's hard to believe there are 2 staging tracks underneath that peninsula, but that retaining wall is removable in case we need to get access to it. On the upper deck, you can see we have a logging facility where we get logs to bring down to the various sawmills on the railroad. And this is a feature I don't talk about too much. These tents, you see, show us the length of each hidden staging track from the Royal Brome grade crossing. So this way, before we shove a train into staging, we know that it's long enough for the track that it's going on. And of course, there's the Rainier Brewery, as well as the gatehouse for the intermodal yard. This is the Argo yard, which is where the Burlington Northern interchanged with the UP, the Union Pacific, and the Milwaukee Road. I'm just turning back to see that again, so you can see we also have a lift-up bridge with a reverse loop, so we can take trains southbound towards the staging yard and then turn them around and then back them into the staging yard so they're ready to come out the next time, if that makes sense. There's Royal Brome there, the grade crossing that we often blow for or forget to. And we have engine facilities, we have a oil platform, we have some warehouses along the back. The C&H sugar plant in downtown Seattle. And this is the Stacy Street yard, which also features one of these cool electronic weigh stations. And a couple of waterfront spurs and so forth. What we call Stacy Yard is actually 2 yards. It's a Stacy Street yard and then the waterfront yard, which is right on the waterfront and was shared between the Milwaukee and the Great Northern. This is the car barge which the Milwaukee ran up to Port Townsend and Port Angeles, where there were some lumber mills. And my friend Eric Van Nice thought of putting a couple of sunken cars underneath and modeling the ocean floor, which I thought was really clever, and he did most of that modeling. And then another friend, Bob Wickham, took the Walther's tugboat and turned it into a steam tug, which is what the Milwaukee Road used for that car barge. I'll come back and show that in a minute when I show you the lower level. This is a multi-level layout, so it's hard to show the whole thing in one pass. That's the tunnel under the stairs coming down from the main level. As we go north from Stacy Street Yard, this is downtown Seattle. And then we approach the main Interbay yard. And this was the Great Northern's main classification yard in Seattle, and the Burlington Northern used it the same way for the early years at least. And there's a scale there, a track scale, as well as a number of cars. I think we have about 6 cars for classifying trains and another 3 arrival-departure tracks. And this is the Dravis Street overpass, right in the middle of the yard, a great rail fanning spot. And there's a car repair shed there with a caboose track next to it. This is a terrific yard. I built it in the late 1980s, and I've been switching cars to go north, east, and south in this yard 15 years longer than the Burlington Northern even existed as a railroad. Here we have some maintenance of way equipment. And this is a photograph of the yard in the 1990s, showing that this car repair shed really was a 3-bay shed next to the yard. And there it is. I kit bashed this a few years ago. We still have some work to do on it. And of course, that's the Time Oil facility next to the Emerson Street overpass. And from there, the track runs double track over the Salmon Bay Bridge, otherwise known as Bridge Number 4. We don't have room to model the whole thing, but at least we get the idea. And there's a branch line that goes into Ballard and Fremont, which are Seattle neighborhoods, along the back, which we haven't finished building, but one day we'll get to it. The famous Bardol Oil was one of their customers there, and that Ballard station is slated to be rebuilt and opened for commuter service in the future, even though it's been out of service since 1970. Here we go along Golden Gardens and Carkeek Park, which is where I live. And we come along north towards Edmonds, and this is the milepost yard at milepost 31, and the Everett Junction. The track on the right goes up the High Line towards Delta Yard, and the Low Line goes around the room to the Bayside Yard. This is the same as what happens on the prototype. We also have a narrow gauge branch that comes out of Everett's Delta Yard and heads all the way over to Colorado. But we enjoy playing with narrow gauge, as you know, and I have some fun videos that describe that operation. We recently dieselized the narrow gauge, and so that's been fun. You can see the various car card pockets that we've been experimenting with. And this is the Weyerhaeuser Mill B lumber mill, which was one of the largest in the world when it was originally built. And if you see this overview of Delta Yard, you can see we have some narrow gauge action, as well as handling some of the local industrial spurs. There's that squid bridge and the big squid chasing down a couple in a rowboat. Now, as we approach Bayside Yard in Everett, there's an engine terminal with a roundhouse. And actually, the roundhouse was in Delta Yard, but never mind. We put it in this corner because that's where it fit. And we also have a swing dance operation going on by the station because my wife and I love swing dancing, so we wanted to advertise that. You've heard a lot about some of these things in some of my videos, but I wanted to just give you an overview. This is the Bayside Yard without too many cars, and it's built above my workbench, which is useful. This is the Troublesome Creek Railway, which is sort of a nod to Paul Scholes because he and I both enjoyed the fact that there was a creek in the Cascades called the Troublesome Creek. This is the Delta Y, and trains go to the right and head up towards Stevens Pass, and this is the magic switch inside this hole. And right now it's lined to go up to Vancouver, BC. That's probably the most important switch on the railroad because it determines whether a train goes north or east, if it's a northbound train. There's a bridge over the Samish River in Everett. And as you see, we've sort of come full circle. Now we're climbing up. There's the Stillaguamish River again. And the forest along the shore of Puget Sound. And the Mount Vernon station. And the Skagit River Bridge. The water main for the house, which is very important. And you'll notice the electrical panels behind the hill there. And along the top here we have the Burlington Yard. Burlington, Washington has a 5-track yard on the prototype, and this is a really fun switching area. There's an anacortes branch that goes to the west and a concrete branch that goes to the east. I'll show you more about that in a minute. And this is the scene that Paul Scholes built for his book on building realistic scenery, which ended up here to my delight. And I'll show you a close-up of that shortly. We have a lift-up bridge over the entrance to the layout. And then the track, the main line, goes up towards staging along the wall in Bellingham to our left. Now you can see my train is still running around the room. If you want to see trains, you have to look at all the other videos on this channel. Here you see this Bellingham staging on the top level, and there's also a ramp on the middle level there, which heads down a gradual grade all the way to Portland staging on the other end of the layout. I'll show you a different view of that in a minute. And of course, climbing up on the top, the eastern end of the railroad, is the Skykomish staging yard. And this is the grotto gravel pit here. Which was near Skykomish, and there's the Skykomish staging yard. And the wooden truss bridge there is the Milwaukee Limestone Junction branch, which went from Bellingham up to Limestone Junction. I really enjoy all this horsepower parked up in here in the staging yard. And you can see the main line in the middle level there winding down. And at the end of the Limestone Junction branch, you have this flood loader that Dave Enger put together from a Walther's kit. And this is where the Milwaukee used ore jennies to haul limestone. And that was a real thing. I love ore jennies, so I was happy to add that to the railroad. Well, that was the first pass. And I'll show you this train just for a minute to enjoy that. And we'll bring it to a stop. Now, after we do that, I'll take you on a tour of the lower deck. But first, we'll just take a moment. Very nice. Interbay yard, ladies and gentlemen. Those proto-throttles are very cool, but they stick up and block the view of the layout. I guess I should figure out a better way to mount them. I took this video with a Sony Handycam, which has a really nice zooming capability, so I thought we would zoom into these engines just for fun. Again, this is the Skykomish staging yard on the east end of the railroad, and all three of these trains are full of freight that has to be worked once it gets down to Interbay, and then the track on the left is the main line. For our second pass, we're going to go down to the lower level. So here we start again at Stacy Street Yard, and I showed you this steam tug that the Milwaukee used. And I'm going to show you this underground scene once more because I love it so much. This is just plexiglass, 16th inch, I think. Anyway, the track goes down to the level, and I couldn't get the autofocus to focus on it because of the cords on the steam tug, but eventually it'll pop into focus. There it goes, and you can see there that the track goes down into a tunnel to the lower deck. Now on the left is Seattle Steam and some other downtown Seattle industries with that road there, and I'll show you that from the other side of the layout. That blue foam is a temporary backdrop that we're using to separate the grain terminal on the left from the industries on the right. And then on the upper deck, the concrete branch goes off to the right, and both of those branches are served from the stairway, which is kind of fun because it's a sit-down job when you're switching those on the stairway. Here, I had to zoom out so you can see the whole thing. There's the stairway, and if you imagine sitting on the steps, you can work both the lower and the upper deck here on this side. This is the realm of the chrome collector. I think there's a video on that, and those are industries in downtown Seattle underneath what used to be the Highway 99 viaduct. And then on the upper level, there we're looking up the stairs to the main floor of the house. But on the upper level is the concrete branch. So here you see on the lower level, the line heading down a 4% grade, I believe it is, or maybe it's 3%. But it's a pretty steep grade. Down past the Milwaukee engine terminal, and down to the lower deck. Those are the main lights for the room, and that's the Monster Road, because this is the Black River Junction. And then way off in the distance on this intermediate deck, right underneath Interbay, we have this intermediate deck we just put in last year, and there's some videos about that if you're interested. And that Black River Junction allows us to stage the passenger trains and the Milwaukee trains and the UP trains off the layout, so we can just run BN all day long without dealing with the interchange trains. But if we have a big operating session, it's fun to have people run the Milwaukee and UP in. I kind of enjoy that. I think the operators enjoy it too. It's a complicated layout. It goes without saying. There's probably about 200 track switches and 500 cars and 70 or more locomotives in operation. Now on the right here, you see the main lower track going down towards what will be Harbor Island and West Seattle. But before we go there, I just was going to show you I have all the throttles ready for action when you first come down the stairs, and the obligatory red onion, which has been featured in more than one of our videos. The basement's a good place to store an onion. Anyway, here's the West Seattle area, which we call LEGOtown for obvious reasons. And I'm waiting to find out if our children will have grandchildren, and if they do, we'll let the grandchildren play with Legos, but if they don't, we'll remove the Legos and do more modeling down here. There were two main industries in Harbor Island. One was a bunch of oil tanks, which will be on the right, and the other one was the Fisher Flour Mill, which will be on the left. The space shuttle there just represents the Boeing company, which also operated down in South Seattle. Here's the bridge over the Samish River, which, as you can see, is still under construction. And this is a stand-in for a steel mill, which we'll put in for the Bethlehem Steel plant. Actually, it's now Nucor, but that doesn't matter. And as you know, if you're watching this channel, we just got this backdrop in here, so representing, downtown Seattle from West Seattle. So this whole shelf here will become West Seattle pretty soon. And those silos will become Fisher Flour, but they're just parked there temporarily. Along with that bridge, which you may or may not use because it's a little big. And since we're here, I thought I'd go in and show you this unfinished part a little bit more clearly. Here we have Northwest Steel and Pipe on the right. We have the aggregates company in the back, which is still there, Cedar Mills and Bardol Oil, all in the Ballard area. So there's a Ballard local that comes out of Interbay and goes over and switches those. Now, there's also a ramp that goes from South Staging, which is the hidden staging we saw a while ago. You can see this ramp climbing up through the middle of Ballard. And it's a very gradual climb that goes all the way up to Bellingham. And this is really handy for continuous operations and also for staging unit trains. And you can see here, well, that rock train looks like a mess. We'll have to re-rail it. But on the far track there is a coal unit train, which is a little early for 1973, but we just figured they would be experimenting with coal movement and coal export at that time. And this ramp is just 2 tracks, and it goes all the way up, and you can see we have on the front track the rock train and then the Milwaukee coast train, which comes down from Bellingham and works Argo and Everett and goes back up to Bellingham. That can take hours just to run that one Milwaukee train. There's the layout diagram of the Bellingham staging tracks for all 5 of them. And then over here we have a few airplanes. And a lift-down bridge, which I mentioned before. I'll show it to you again. There it goes. And then the train goes south from here all the way around the layout. I really love this Paul Scholes bridge here that I was lucky enough to take over after he built it and didn't want to keep it. And it's so beautifully scenic, I thought I would let you enjoy that for a minute with this zoom feature of this fancy Sony Handycam. See, we can just zoom in on these wonderful characters that are doing some fishing, and the trees and the bushes, rocks and the river. Very, very nice. You can see that trestle and bridge in the background there. This is by far the most beautiful scenery on the layout. Most of it I just sort of threw together. And then on the left here is the concrete branch. We're trying to figure out what to do scenically with that and maybe have a backdrop dividing the 2 areas. And of course the handrail on the stairs makes it a little awkward, figure out what to do scenically. There are the car cards for the concrete branch. And that pretty much sums it up. There's the overview shot when you first come in the room. You got Burlington on the left, Bayside in the middle, Delta on the back side of the peninsula, and Ballard way in the back, Interbay Yard on the right, and Black River Junction down below. And that pretty much does it. And the important thing to remember about this layout is that I started it in 1985, which means that it's almost 40 years of work to get to this point, and I was lucky enough to stay in the same house for most of that time. And I didn't do this without help from a lot of friends who have come over and given their time and their ideas, and I'm very grateful to each one of them. Model railroading is a great hobby, and we have truly had much fun with trains this entire time. I mentioned in the beginning that this is the 100th in a series of operations videos, but if you explore my channel, you'll discover there are also a number of shorts, some how-to clinics, videos of prototype trains, and some really great other model railroads that I visited that you can see. So check out the channel. It's hard to predict what the next 100 videos will bring, but if you have ideas or interests in certain topics, please let me know in the comments below. It's been a lot of fun making these videos, and I really appreciate all of you watching them and the feedback that you have given me. I'd like to start a series of how-to clinics called Model Railroading 101 and delve into the electronics and the bench work and the track laying and some of these topics that are involved in a large model railroad like this, so I hope you'll enjoy that too. In the meantime, and as usual, this is Burr Stewart wishing you much fun with trains.